Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beyond Compliance. My name is Jim Albright, and I'm excited to be back again with y'all to talk about one of our more popular topics, finding ways to improve food safety culture. Now, for all the new folks in the audience today, thank you so much for being here. We're so glad you found us. The Beyond Compliance series is designed to bring industry experts directly to you to share their perspectives on all of the influences and challenges that are shaping manufacturing today. And we aim to provide proven guidance to you that you can use right now to evolve manufacturing processes or technologies, and of course, outcomes. And the best part is that you get a chance to take part in the discussion by sending in your comments and questions. And in case you missed it, this series is brought to you by Safety Chain. Safety Chain's digital plant management platform is trusted by thousands of process manufacturers. They use it to unite plant production and quality teams and maximize throughput and yield, ensure quality and compliance, and optimize labor and productivity. It's all through how you use your data. All right, now before we get started, I just need to let you all know that we've muted all your mics and we will be spending some time later in this webinar for questions. So please, again, do submit your questions using the webinar panel. And as always, we are recording this session and we will be sending you the recording along with the slides later today. Okay, I'm really excited for today's speaker, Dr. Lone Jespersen. She's the founder and principal of Cultivate, which is a firm helping food manufacturers all over the world make safe, great tasting food by driving a continuous culture of food safety throughout their entire organization. Now, Lone's been a speaker here on this Beyond Compliance series quite a few times and frequently speaks about global food safety issues at events, and she authors many articles around this topic and is even chaired working groups such as within GFSI. So Lone, thank you so much for coming back to speak with us today.
Thank you very much. It's a topic that I cannot stop talking about, and especially having discussions with. So there's so many of you who are probably tasked today with figuring out what this means for your organizations, or maybe just get some tips for where you go next on your journey. So hopefully we can provide you with a little bit of that today. I'd like to focus in on three things. Really briefly, just why are we focusing on culture? Why is it talked about so much? The second one, how do we break culture down, specifically a culture of food safety, so that you can make it practical and create practical changes in your organization? And what are some of the industry leaders doing as well? So I've been blessed with some wonderful clients, and three of them have permitted me to share some of their journey today as well. So I hope you find that interesting. So I come from Denmark. As Danes, we are inherently rude in the way that we communicate. We like pickled herring. All of these things are part of the cultural assumptions that I grew up with and that makes the Danish culture. Had a chance to move to Austria as part of my mechanical engineering degree and worked there for a couple of years, and certainly learned a lot about the assumptions that the Austrian culture makes around following rules and making great chocolate cake. Who doesn't want that? 2000, my husband and I decided to move to probably the friendliest country on the planet of the earth that I know of, Canada. And 15 years in Canada really taught both of us, as these very rude communicators, my husband is Danish as well, what it means to be genuinely friendly, which is so inherent to the Canadian culture. And of course, there's maple syrup if you want to go the culinary route that they do really well. In 2015, we moved to Switzerland. We had to move back to Europe for family reasons, and we ended up in Switzerland where we live today, and have certainly appreciated again, what if there's a rule, then it's there for a reason and you follow it. That's the assumption of the Swiss culture, or one of them. And of course, you can't say Switzerland without mentioning great chocolate. Can you see a theme here? I threw up the Irish flag here because I did try and make a living as a show jumper, failed miserably, and decided that mechanical engineering was much better path for me. Now, I'm not sharing this with you because I want to befriend all of you on Facebook. I'm sharing this because I want to just make you think about that culture is about assumptions. And it's about What is it in our organizations that drive what is accepted and what's not accepted at a very deep personal level? And groups manage these assumptions and reinforce them. And that's why culture is so important. That's why we're focused on changing culture, because we can actually live with some assumptions that are wrong. But because we've done things in a certain way, we've learned them to be accepted for a long, long time, it can be really tough to see how culture can ultimately cause a disaster. And that's precisely so. In 2004, I had the wonderful opportunity to join Maple Leaf Foods in Canada. And I started there in the continuous improvement world. And in 2008, we were the sole responsible company for the death of 23 Canadians. So 23 Canadians who lost their life because of what we had sent out into the marketplace, sliced meat infected with listeriosis, or Listeria monocytogenes, sorry. This turned Maple Leaf completely on its head, and Dr. Randy Hoffman was hired in as the Chief Food Safety Officer, and I had the fortunate opportunity to work with Randy from 2009 until 15, being responsible for getting the Maple Leaf food safety strategy executed. And in doing so, really had touch points across the organization, working with teams, figuring out what are these assumptions that can cause something like this to happen, and what is it that we need to do different. So based on these two experiences, living in a lot of different countries, but certainly also the Maple Leaf experience, what I bring today into my everyday is a perspective on that culture, unless it's challenged, can be very hurtful. But culture, when it's challenged and understood, can be probably your most powerful tool in your toolkit. That's what we do at Cultivate every day. And one of the people that have had the chance to run across in that journey over the last 3 years is Rattan. Rattan works for a produce company in Australia called One Harvest. It's one of our dear clients. And Rattan operates, or he works in the field, in the leafy green fields in Tasmania. And I've visited with him a couple of times, 5:30 in the morning out in the fields, looking for how he and his harvest crew constantly and ongoingly protects that product for foreign body contaminants. They chase away mouse, they look for whatever comes up the belt of the harvester to make sure that it doesn't actually pass on into the crates, to make sure that it's safe for the consumers. Rattan lives on a small South Pacific island that due to climate changes is going to be gone in a number of years. So he looks at this with a very personal connection. He looks at food safety as it is what puts bread on his table at home today, but also his loyalty to the consumers of One Harvest and the company is just incredibly inspiring. Wanted to just let you know, we're blessed with a wonderful set of clients and partners that we do exactly that. We sort of help hold up the mirror and say, this is who you are from a cultural perspective, and where might it help you or not, but also on special projects to move the culture ahead. And measuring is exactly one of the things that we do a lot of. And it was what I based my PhD on, was to say, how can we quantify a culture of food safety? So that if you are that person that needs to create change within your organization, you have a vehicle to speak with your colleagues about, you have a vehicle to engage your senior leaders in. And we use this notion of maturity. And many of you might have seen something like this before. We use a 5-stage model. Stage 1, really quickly, I'm not here to talk about the assessment tool necessarily, but I wanted you just to have a little bit of an insight into it. Stage 1 is about doubt. It's really where any activity around food safety, or at least most of them, are taken because somebody outside the company are telling you to do so. So that could be regulators, it could be customers that are really pushing, and therefore activities around food safety happen. Stage 5, at the other end of the spectrum, is where food safety is so ingrained into the organizational culture that it's really treated as one of the critical pieces of any manufacturing facility in the food industry and owned by the front line. So in a stage 5 company, you would come in and see these self-contained frontline groups that are really owning food safety for their line. They know their data, they know what impacts it, they onboard their team members themselves into what's expected and those valid assumptions. So as we measure across the benchmark we have right now, these are the proportion of, or if you look at the stages here, we have across our client base, 19% of them fall into the doubt stage, but the majority are really in those two center stages, react to and know. 2 stages that cost a lot of money to be in because you're doing a lot of retesting, using belts and suspenders. So there's a real good financial incentive to move ahead, but certainly also one from a risk management perspective. Let's look at some practical ways here that we can break down culture, because my engineering background really does not allow me to not be able to have some rationale in how we measure, and also how we can just have a logical breakdown of a topic like this. Out of my research, we documented these 5 dimensions. So these are the 5 things we talk about in the title, and I'll go through each of them. But if you then picture these dimensions and you swoop around that, the great work that was completed by GFSI and our technical working groups, we had 37 members in that working group who were so passionate to figure out how do we take these 5 dimensions or 5 things in the center of this circle, and how can we break them further down so that it becomes even more practical to say vision and mission. What does that mean? Well, it is about setting direction. Okay, I can relate to that one. So I really want to commend GFSI under the leadership of Mike Roback to have taken this step to figure out for GFSI, what does food safety culture mean, and how do we subsequently over the next couple of years get that built into the GFSI guidance document. We can now wrap another circle around this, which is really cool, I think, and that's the tools and tactics. So now we can say, okay, we have the breakdown in the 5 things. We have what those are then broken further into. And then we have these tools and tactics that really make it practical, because depending on where you're at on that maturity curve I showed you before, some of these tools are going to be effective for you, and in some cases they're not going to be effective. But regardless, once you know where you're at on this maturity journey, then you can say, what do I need to focus on doing for vision and mission and the other 4 elements or dimensions in here to move my culture forward at a pace that works for us, that integrates into all of our priorities. So allow me just to go into detail with each of these 5 for a second. Probably going to take more than a second, actually, but for a little while. We start with mission and vision. Starts with the leadership messaging. We look at how directions are set, what are the expectations, and how are the expectations set, the structure of the organization, the value, and the purposes. A couple of tools I'd recommend that you look at here. Integrate food safety into your business strategy. Get it into the boardroom, get it into the senior leadership discussions on strategy. What are the key priorities that needs to be reviewed, where resources need to be allocated and priorities set? And it happens at that very senior level. Look at the organizational structure. Does food safety and quality report straight into ops, or does it report straight up into the CEO? There's not one answer that's right for everybody here, but it's about taking an active stance on what is right for your organization. And your HR colleagues out there will certainly have a lot to offer on that particular journey and discussion around your organizational structure. If we look at the people dimension, which is the second thing that we break down culture into, we look at incentives, rewards, recognition. How is your organization learning around food safety? What are the stakeholders? How do you govern what's going on, and what are the communication rhythms? It's in this particular one, what I'd like to suggest to you is that one thing is select a way for you to understand and drive behavior change. I really like the ABC model. If you have anybody in your organization in EHS that does behavior-based safety, they would also be familiar with ABC. But it's really simple. A stands for antecedents. Please forget that word. It's a social scientist word or way of saying tools and tactics. B stands for behavior. C stands for consequences. And when we're introducing changes, we have to consider all 3. We are often guilty of focusing on the A. We put great training out. We put great procedures out. We put all these tools out. And then we're somewhat by magic expecting that behaviors will follow, when in fact, it's the consequences that drive the behaviors once we have the acquired knowledge. I'll give you a personal example. I moved to Switzerland, 3 kilometers to the supermarket. A couple of weeks after we moved, I took the car, drove there, came back, and I got 2 speeding tickets. So I came from 15 years in Canada where speeding limits are largely guidelines. Maybe we strike that from the recording. But the point here is that I'm not speeding in Switzerland anymore. And it's because I know the consequences of my behavior, the behavior of speeding, is that I'll get 2 very large speeding tickets. So consequences are what drives our behaviors. It's not, I don't have a safer car in Switzerland. I don't have more knowledge about the rules of the road, but the consequences are very different in the Swiss context. So really, really encourage you, look into this, find a way to adopt an ABC model, and it works on spouses, pets, children, and everything else. Cross-functional food safety Gemba walks. Gemba walks, essentially the practice of being in a production facility or in a warehouse or in an office for that matter, where value is created, and observe what's going on and look for where might there be opportunity for improvement. Look it up or give us a shout and we can help you with this one. What it's really about fostering a mindset of saying that we're not going to be reacting to issues anymore. We're going to look for those issues or those risks that could become issues, and Gemba walks are just a fantastic tool for doing so. So really encourage you to look that up and maybe ask your continuous improvement and operations colleagues as well if they have something like that you can leverage. Adaptability is number 3 here, probably the one that we see the biggest gaps in when we work with companies, and it's all about how you're introducing change. You'll see change, crisis management, problem solving, agility, expectations, and current state there. It is one of the reasons why a lot of our change initiatives fail, is that we don't plan them out or we don't have a chosen model for how we navigate around change. And it's an interesting topic for me because from a personal perspective, we all know what it feels like to be the recipient of change that we're not actually part of either implementing or developing, but it's sort of served to us out of nowhere. It's not a pleasant feeling. And by adopting a change model, so I just popped in here the Kübler-Ross, which is a very simple change model. Google it, you can see it. It goes through the different stages that each of us, more or less all of us, go through when we exhibit or when we see change that's important for us. When change is important for us, we go through these different stages of change on the Kübler-Ross. And by having that knowledge of change, it might actually be that we can see greater effectiveness when we have a new procedure around metal detection, or if we have a new procedure for how you garb up coming into a plant, or if it's about a front line in a food service outlet, how you engage your colleagues in holding everybody accountable, even if they are new and young. Change model can help with the effectiveness of rolling something like that out. Understand cultural differences. My great friend Marie Tanner over at DFA is so passionate about this, and it's all about you're not changing your organizational culture, but you're understanding the backgrounds of your colleagues so you can see why there might be different interpretations when a change comes along. So I gave you a little bit about my background. Well, moving to Canada from Denmark, I communicated in a very different way than after 15 years in Canada, because we're just rude and obnoxious in Denmark the way we communicate. My grandfather giving me a hard time over how poorly I was show jumping was a bit of a compliment. And you can't do that in the Canadian context. So understanding these cultural differences will help you mitigate the risks that come with them. And you know what? Use the opportunities for change, because there's going to be a lot of different perspectives that can help everybody change. Margarita Gomez at Ocean Spray has one of the most cross-cultural teams I've ever seen in a food safety and quality team. And it is just, you can feel the energy in there because she's released people to use that difference. So understand it and plan out how you can mitigate any issues around it. Consistency. This is the one we love. And it's about documentation, performance measures, and accountability. It's not whether we have documentation and performance measures. In the cultural context, it's what we do with them. So do we use the documentation? Do we actually have performance metrics that are used, the insights from them are used in a regular communication with them? And that is one of the tools I'd encourage you to look at. Take a blank page, sit down across your organization with different people and say, how should we be communicating around food safety? At what frequency? Who should be communicating? Why? Who are the recipients? And put a rhythm together for maybe it's a quarterly town hall with your plant manager or CEO. Maybe it's a monthly meeting where the head of the different functional heads actually gets up and talks about food safety from their vantage point to all of everybody else in the plant. Maybe it's the supervisor who does that on a monthly basis, the daily huddles as well. But have deliberately documenting that makes it so much more reliable that it will be there also when you have new people, new leaders coming in, because now you've documented your rhythm, and candidly, I would put it straight into your food safety management system. This is how we communicate. Document your consequences. Consequences, again, is what drives our procedures. What happens when somebody does something really well? What happens when something needs to be corrected? If we then go to the next dimension, which is one that we had a lot of discussion on in the GFSI working group, this one was led by Sarah Mortimer at Land O'Lakes. And as you all know, Sarah has a really deep passion around hazard and risk management. We decided to keep it in as a separate thing because it's one of the elements that are really important to drive forward a risk-based culture like food safety. It's about verifying hazard and risk awareness. It's about engagement. It's about foundational hazard information and education. Look at role-specific risk competencies. So if I'm in product development, I might look at the content of a label from a very different perspective than that person that picks it out of the rack in a production facility and puts it onto the packing machine. It's the same risk that we're avoiding, potentially allergen contamination or cross-contamination because there's the wrong label on it. But we have very different competencies in why that risk needs to be managed and how we do that. And a near-miss system for food safety. A little bit like our Gemba walk, but actually building in, looking for those risks continuously. So what we get out of this is a linked plan, right? So you can now see that you have your 5 things in the middle, the dimensions in the middle, and you can see the breakdown on the GFSI dimensions one step out from that. And I encourage all of you to go onto my GFSI and download the position paper there where there's much more detail around those sub-dimensions. And then you can create for yourself the last part of the wheel, the outer or the rim of the wheel is really yours to create. So what are the tools that makes most sense for you to move your organization consistently ahead on its journey to maturing its food safety culture? I'm going to switch gears a little bit here with you or for you and just share a couple of insights from 3 companies that we're so humbled to be working with at Cultivate. 3 things that really come up pretty consistently across our client base. How do you get started? Do we actually walk the talk for food safety? And how do we know? And how do we create this linked plan that is not just a document that doesn't have the impact that we're looking for, namely to continuously improve our food safety culture so that the mindset and attitude of those around us defend the product like Rattan does every day with the leafy green out in Tasmania. So in going through these, I just want to thank 3 fantastic companies, PepsiCo, Purdue, and One Harvest, Mike Lewin and Cole McGilligan from PepsiCo, who we've been working with for coming up 2 years. The unique, I'll get into that in a second. One Harvest out in Australia, CEO Sam Robson and COO Andrew Frenzy, who have just been amazing to work with as well for coming up 2 years. Purdue Farms with Jeff Shaw and Wade Fluke. We've been doing a lot of assessment with them and really been such a pleasure working with both of them and their team at Purdue. So I want to thank all of them for permission to share a couple of thoughts here. And I just want to also let you know that, as Brian said, you will have access to the deck, and I hope you find it valuable. But I've taken the liberty to not share these customer slides, and I hope you understand that as well. Let's walk through it. So getting started, how do people get started? A little bit of a background here for you to think about. We get started when we gain some kind of insight. And what I really like about clients' work on this is that he works with this continuum from stupid to insight. And just to put stupid in context, I'm sure I'm the only one who's ever sat outside the door of my house because I forgot my key. I felt stupid. And when you have that kind of experience, you can either decide to not do anything about it, or you can decide to have an insight. I decided to have an insight because we have a very cold floor outside our house, and put a little hook inside my backpack, and I always look for that my keys are on that hook when I leave. So we make this move from stupid to insight by, in a stupid state, we're sort of gripped by these flawed beliefs. And when we go into insight mode, we escape them for whatever reason. So we decide to challenge those, as I said before, these assumptions that we might get some insight from outside our company. It might be something that's happened to us in the form of a crisis, like the unfortunate event that we had at Maple Leaf. But something happens and we escape from, we lose this fixation on, well, it's just the way it is. It can also be that we just have a lack of experience, and now we have more experience. I'll give you a couple of examples of that. It could also be, and I see this in some clients when we start working with them, there's just a passive stance around food safety. It's just not something that we say that we need to prioritize at par with what we do for operational excellence. And those that make a change sometimes have a very active stance. They say, this is not going to happen on its own. We need a plan. We need to have the right people. We need to do something at a pace that works for us. So let's look at these three fantastic companies, starting with PepsiCo and how they got to getting started. It was largely about building a guiding coalition around risk culture, and it was very much spearheaded by their senior executives, and it was tied directly into their functional strategies as well. They took a very active stance to say, we need to make a difference. In One Harvest, candidly, and I think Sam would agree with me on this, a bit of executive fear about all of the different terrible incidents that had happened with leafy greens, especially in North America. And he was looking at this and saying, hey, I have a fear for how this is going to impact my business because I just don't know enough how we're controlling here. So he really wanted to escape that flawed belief around status quo in his company. For Purdue Farms, they had a new executive leader for FSQ that came in and had a very critical eye to asking the ever important why. So I would say that's probably also bringing in that experience that might be a little different than what was there, and also escaping what they thought was good enough. So they also took a very active stand on that. So I hope this makes sense to you. Let's look a little bit at the walking the talk here. I want to see if we can have some great questions at the end of this. How do you know that you're walking the talk? We measure this as part of assessing a food company's culture of food safety. And we use this notion also, if you look up the y-axis here, it's the social desirability score. And social desirability is a measure of how willing people are to actually tell others if there's something wrong, speak up if there's something they don't understand, or keep pushing and challenging. So not assuming that because something is related to food safety, then we can't challenge it. So a social desirability score of 0 is really one that we're shooting for. If we have a high score on social desirability, we have a high gap between what we say and what we do. In other words, we're not walking the talk. So across the companies that we've measured with on this so far, there's about sort of 3 subgroups here where we're looking at this lower left-hand corner here, where people are really not very worried about their own image, and they're much more worried about food safety performance. So again, they are ready to speak up if they score in these lower ranges. If we look at the middle group here, there's a tendency to be overly negative or overly positive when we're asking for food safety questions and asking them to rate themselves against these statements. And it's mostly because they're worried about preserving some kind of image as opposed to telling us exactly what's on their mind, and they're not really speaking up about risk. In this top group up here is a really very potentially dangerous place to be from a walking the talk, because you really you have some significant gaps between what you say and what you do. There's a high worry about self-image, and there's also it's hard to get a true answer for what's going on with risks. And this is why, so we use the scale also to say you can't just administer a survey, ask a bunch of questions, and then assume that there's no bias from anybody. This social desirability score, and measuring the walk and the talk gap, really allows us to control for that gap, but also give some insights. So create those insights that can create a journey or can help a journey get going about where you might have some really good traits in your culture, or where you might have some significant risks specific to food safety. So what have these three great companies done? PepsiCo, we've really seen this harmonization of risk culture. So they've looked at developing a bespoke, we worked with them to develop a bespoke PepsiCo risk maturity model that includes food safety, quality, and people safety, or EHS. So it's a desire and aspiration from a PepsiCo perspective to really look at risk culture as opposed to assuming that these two are very different. In the case of One Harvest, a change from just being on an action side, but also to look at actions plus risks. So this allows everybody also to have that discussion around risks that really can say, okay, I understand the risk. I disagree with how you're looking at that risk. Let's talk about it. In other words, again, we're closing that gap between what we say and what we do. From a Purdue perspective, they did a fantastic job having a structured conversation to empower the food safety managers at Purdue. So we did some education, some training, we had some communications, and Wade Fluke really did an outstanding job just getting operations leaders to talk with their teams about the findings and the assessment. Again, understanding, setting the expectations that everybody can speak to what this means to us specifically, coming to the assessment. Lastly, I wanted just to share with you a little bit around another key learning, and it's this notion of a one-link plan. And what I mean by that is that it's really you cannot see this journey. You can't see your culture continuously maturing if you're just looking at one tiny element or sub-dimension on that wheel that I shared with you before. You have to have a view to all of it. You need to look at all 5 dimensions. You need to look at all of the sub-dimensions. You might choose not to action some of them right now because you might be stronger in them than you are in some others. But prioritize that wheel and say, where do we start our journey? Where do we go next? With an eye to that there's one link plan here, because it's a little bit like training for a marathon, and I buy the coolest shoes on the shelf, and then I think I can get the best time doing these 42K. And we all know that's not going to work. I need the shoes. I need the coach. I need to understand what nutrition is required. I need to pick a marathon that is the right one for me. And so there's all these different elements to me succeeding in running that marathon. Our culture journey is really no different. Look around the wheel that I shared before and make sure you have one link plan. So let's go back to our cases here. What have our great companies been doing? Partnership on the risk culture. I mentioned building a plan that really includes both EHS and food safety and quality. One Harvest did a fantastic job building action plans bottom up. So getting frontline teams to give input into what needs to change, and then rolling that up into a plan that follows. They have a very structured, strategic rhythm and execution rhythm, and this feeds right into that. With Purdue, they decided to go back and look at their indicators for food safety, because we had some really fantastic discussion about that some of them the older metrics might actually not be driving the behaviors you're looking for. So this is a big issue that I see a lot, is having measures for food safety that you think are driving some behaviors that you want to see, but when you start looking at it, if you have customer complaints as a measure for success, what kind of behavior does that drive for a frontline supervisor who needs to ensure food safety performance every day? So they did a great job at Purdue looking at that and making a change to their current indicators. So summing it up, how do you get started? challenge those flawed beliefs, so challenge status quo. And if you can't do it yourself, find an ally and find somebody that can help you bring that message over to say, this is what we believe to be true today. This is why we think it might actually put us at risk. Seek input from others with experience. So there's just a wonderful opportunity to link up and go lockstep with our colleagues in EHS and with our colleagues in HR as well. We're already partners in most cases with our friends in manufacturing, but really link up and say, what is it that HR is doing around rewards and recognition programs, and where does food safety fit in? If you are a food safety professional, have you had input? Are there actually something in there that drives the consequences when somebody does something well for food safety? So these are examples of some existing programs that we know are out there, and that if we actually take an active stance and says we need to have food safety included in that, it'll certainly make it more integrated, and we won't see the decline in those programs that we sometimes see, because it's just part of how we do business. Walking the talk. Are you walking the talk? Is your organization walking the talk, and how do you know? I encourage you to ask those questions and find a way. And I'm not here to promote Cultivate. I'll share some of our papers where you'll see the measure for walking the talk. The scale is in there, so the statements that we measure against, and you can take that and run with it if you have the capacity in house. But find a way to have that insight around how do you actually know that we're walking the talk today, and find some examples for where it works and where it doesn't, and start the dialogue with your partners in your organization. Make sure you have one link plan. You do that by taking the time to involve others. You cover all dimensions. Don't feel that this sits on your shoulders. It's an organizational focus. It has to be organizational ownership, and that means that everybody needs to have a view to what are we doing for the next little while around this wheel, and how does it fit in. If you are in a food manufacturing or food service company, and lucky to be there, then you chose to make a profit out of selling food to others, and therefore we own, when we're in those positions, actually taking the time to involve everybody to have the best possible link plan that can protect our consumers, make sure everybody has a job to come back to, and the company can prosper. Coming back to the wheel, take it, use it to however you decide. Use the GFSI document as a guidance for those sub-dimensions. I edited a food safety magazine special edition on food safety culture that came out in July, and go there, look at it. We have about, I think, 14 different industry leaders who co-wrote that, and there's just some real good nuggets in there as well. So a couple of resources for you: GFSI position paper, food safety magazine special edition, if you're looking for something new, and then wrap your own tools around the rim there as for how you best move your organization forward. And if you need help, we're of course here to do so. I want to just wrap this up with this great saying that was shared by Cargill, a couple of good friends there. It's amazing how we look at this newfound interesting culture and get a little frustrated about its complexity. There is no off-the-shelf action plan that's going to make your culture different. There is no off-the-shelf way for you to engage your cross-functional teams, your senior leaders. It's something that you have to drive within your organization. There's lots of resources and lots of people that can help, and it is absolutely not easy. It's never easy to do the right thing, but it is always right.
Wow, that is an amazing quote, Lone, and an amazing presentation. Everything from the cultural dimensions wheel to the practical learnings, getting you started walking the talk. I love the stories you told. There was so much that we learned today, and it all kind of stemmed from your experience over there at Maple Leaf. And thank you so much for sharing that story with us and helping us through understanding these five foundational pillars to build our better food safety culture here at our plants. Lone, if you are open to it, we're going to have some questions here. We do have some that just came in. There's a lot of folks who are asking about resources. So I think what we're going to do is put some of those links. And of course, again, we're going to share this presentation with everybody after the session is ended. But could you give us an example of a company assessment tool? I know there's a bunch out there, maybe some free ones. Would you mind sharing a few of them with us?
Yeah. So my favorite tool is the Cultivate assessment tool. So we do have an assessment tool at Cultivate, and it's a little different than some of the others out there because it's very much based on triangulation. So I did mention that we have a survey. Yes, we do use a survey tool that includes those walking the talk statements as well. But then we also do consistently on-site verification. So we go and do focus groups and interviews, and then we look at performance documentation. So a set of food safety meeting minutes tells you a lot about culture. Awesome. So we take those three inputs, put them together, and that really gives you a sense for where on that maturity model that you sit. But there are a number of different assessment tools out there as well. I did an evaluation in 2017 of 8 of them, and there's a peer-reviewed paper that has the findings from that as well. So that might be a place to start for other tools as well.
All right, perfect. Yeah, check out cultivatefoodsafety.com to learn a little bit more about that food safety tool. Okay, here's a question from Virginia. Is there a comprehensive survey to determine social desirability, or is it more of just people watching?
Oh, great one. I like it. So the 16 statements we use is part of a survey. And it's because it's asking for some extreme situations that we can then turn around and calculate the walking the talk score on. So those social desirability statements that's in the peer-reviewed paper that I have out is about the survey. Having said that, I like the comment, Virginia, about the people watching, because so we can assess social desirability by the survey. But then what I see when I do these on-site verifications is, standing and watching is just a wealth of knowledge, as you probably know.
Sure.
And it is about looking at, do people, is there a travel pattern that goes through an area that's not supposed to be stepped on? Is it that, that door is supposed to be closed, but you know what, it's actually really clear that door is always open because it's so blooming hot in here. So having that, standing there and watching behaviors, and that's why I have in the wheel for those example tools, both Gemba walks and near misses as well. It's really about teaching people to see, because we are so busy every day going in plants and looking for compliance, checking paperwork. Stand in a corner and watch people work.
Right. So true. Okay, here's one from Brittany. This is this is really a good one. What advice would you give to a generally low-risk food product company that's being intentional and cautious, but perhaps has less material to cover, or they don't even have a critical control point because they are of low risk? So, how could a company like that try to improve their food safety culture?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's depending on where your starting point is, Brittany, I think it's there's 3 potential things you can do. So if you want to do the right thing, but might not necessarily be able to, if your organization is trying to figure out what do we do with all of that good intention, I always go back to making food safety personal first. Get everybody engaged and say food safety is personal, and what does that mean when we go out into a plant and do some of these observations, where we actually made it so difficult for our team members on the floor to do the right thing, and have that kind of observation again, but because people are taking food safety personal. The second part is I want to draw you back to the ABC model. Think about consequences and behaviors. So well-intended, great. What is it that when you see behaviors in that organization, what are the behaviors you're striving for? So you're well-intended. I want to see that we have frontline supervisors that have used all of this good intent to have a conversation, dialogue with their team on a regular basis around what food safety means to them, how we're performing, how we can improve. So a well-intended culture is often one where continuous improvement comes much faster than it does in one that's passive aggressive. And the last thing that I think I would look at if you're at this stage of maturity is I would look at cost. So I would say, if I am a mature company, I have good control, I have low risk, what's actually the cost of running my food safety management system? Am I getting enough for my dollars? Am I getting enough am I taking enough variation out? Can I get more variation out of the temperature of baking bread that might give me higher yield, but without compromising food safety? So I would bring in that cost discussion at some point if you have a mature culture.
Those are 3 perfect points. I love it. Okay. Here's a comment that just came in. I am a food safety manager at my company, but don't have a lot of authority. I'd love some recommendations here for this attendee loan. I'm sure you hear this all the time.
So in my entire time with Maple Leaf after 2008, I really had no authority. I could not go and tell a plant manager to do something specific. I had to find the best way of creating 2 things: how I best influence, how I best create followership. So I think I would look at how do you position what you need to get done through the lens of why would people follow me in doing this? What have I done enough to explain why this is important? Have I done enough to understand how this might be a competing priority with a lot of other things on their plate right now? And have I actually done enough to let them know what is expected and what they can expect of me as a support in this, and then follow through on this? It sort of ties a little bit into when we discuss trust, right? I mean, the 2 of the biggest enemies of trust is that we're just not consistent in how we get things done, and we're not transparent around it. And I think building followership has a lot to do with that as well. So be consistent in how you engage others and build that followership. And do you know the most magical part about being in your situation where you're a food safety manager without the authority is once you have that followership, it is way more effective than having authority.
That is great advice. That's great leadership advice. Hey, so I'm noticing a lot of you are looking for some of the resources Lone gave earlier. So don't worry, we will send links along with the presentation recording and the slides. I see our time is getting short here. So let's get to one last question here. How do we measure where we are at or if we've obtained proper food safety culture? That is a great question.
Yeah. I think you can do 1 or 2 things, or maybe both. You can do a culture assessment, baseline, develop your wheel, have a timeline around what you want to do, create change, go back and measure against baseline. That's one way. The other way that I'd really encourage everybody to look at it as well is if we do what we say we want to do by maturing our culture, it should impact our food safety performance metrics, our EMP performance, our foreign body contaminants. Those classic food safety measures should show a difference in performance through those if we actually have done the right things for our culture and matured it. So 2 things: do an assessment, baseline, come back, do another one, or look at your existing metrics and see if you're actually moving the needle through your culture work.
Outstanding. All right. I think we're going to wrap it up here, folks, but obviously there is so much more of this conversation left to have. Lone, we certainly appreciate you spending time with us today. We hope you come back very, very soon because there's, again, so much more to unpack with this topic. And a lot of folks, I'm sure, are going to have more questions. So we'll be sure to pass them on if we get them. And then, of course, we do have some additional resources, some of which, Lone, you have helped author. You can check those out at safetychain.com, or you can visit Cultivate at cultivatefoodsafety.com, where there are several new resources for you to consume and utilize in your plants today. So thank you to all for joining us. We hope to see you on the next Beyond Compliance. And again, Lone, thank you so much for being part of this. We hope everybody has a good rest of your day.
Thank you very much.